little later on. Second, the chat is open for your questions and comments. We ask that all of your comments and questions remain centered in the concept that we are all created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and accordingly, we treat one another with respect and dignity. My name is Leslie Dannon Rosenthal, and I serve as the co-chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force for the Community Relations Committee, the CRC, of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. I'm also a past president of the Federation. We formed this task force last summer in the wake of an overwhelming outcry for racial justice in the wake of the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. We want our federation through the CRC to stand up for racial equity and justice, as Jews have stood with the Black community for decades. We want to understand what it means for our Jewish community to be anti-racist and to take the necessary steps to get there. In thinking about that, what that work should look like, we were very clear that one important step in the journey would be to start to understand the origins, causes, and effects of racism. This 18-day challenge is part of that journey. It's entirely appropriate that we take on the task of learning and growth at this particular moment. We are just about halfway through the counting of the Omer, the days between the first Seder and Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. The Omer is a time for introspection and for seeking to enhance the characteristics of the soul, of our persona, so that we are better prepared to take on the obligations of the Torah, whose central tenet, we learn from Hillel, is that which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. In our work as a task force, we've learned that this is challenging work. As we've all seen in what we've read, watched, and heard this week, encountering terms such as white fragility and white supremacy may take us aback, challenge our worldview, and make us uncomfortable. In the course of this challenge, we will all be uncomfortable. I hope we can all push through that discomfort to grow in our understanding of racism so that we can be a part of the work to combat it. I love what Dr. Bryant T. Marks, a noted diversity, equity, and inclusion educator, says. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort level, not in your comfort zone. I am honored to be on this journey of growth with all of you. I want to thank the terrific team of lay leaders who helped make this challenge possible: Amanda Stone Greenblatt, Rachel Klinghoffer Marcus, Deborah Nevis, and Alana Wilf-Tansman. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Linda Scherzer, my wonderful professional partner and the director of the CRC.
Thank you, Leslie, and good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and tonight's facilitator, Cheryl Rosario. Cheryl has served as director of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New Jersey since May of 2019, working with over 45 trustees to fund programs that empower and uplift women and girls. In this part-time role, she's also been helping our Jewish Federation plan educational programming on diversity and racism in America. A visionary leader in corporate social responsibility, family foundations, and nonprofit arenas, Cheryl has worked in the philanthropic and diversity and inclusion space for more than 25 years. Her work is vast. It includes Vice President of Social Responsibility at Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. She spent 10 years leading the strategic direction and grant making for the arts and historic preservation at American Express. As Director of Philanthropy, her bio is long and impressive, and well, I think we're going to have to actually send it to you so you get a full and better idea of all that Cheryl has done. We're incredibly grateful to have Cheryl working with us on the 18-day challenge, where she's helping to curate the materials that we're sending you, and will serve as moderator and facilitator of all 3 Sunday night dialogue sessions. It's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Cheryl Rosario.
Thank you so much, Linda, and good evening to everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you. And as Leslie mentioned, a big congrats to all of you for taking on this 18-day challenge. This is hard work, but the fact that all of you are here, and especially on a weekend evening, a big congrats, and you really should feel good about taking this step. Doing this work is certainly not a sprint. It's a marathon, and it takes the dedication to learn and to explore and ask questions. And so we will be doing a lot of that this evening. I'm now going to share my screen and we'll go through a few slides and really set the stage for this evening before we go into our breakout groups. We'll come back and have some discussion as a full group, and then of course leave time for questions and answers. Let me share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. So Leslie touched on a little bit of this during her remarks, but I've been doing a lot of these type of discussions because we really are in a heightened social justice environment. Ever since 2020, after George Floyd's death, a lot of organizations started to focus on this work. Of course, it's something that we hope has been important to individuals and organizations for a very long time. But the events of 2020, as well as the pandemic, where we saw a lot of inequities and still do, whether we are looking at food insecurity, organizations, small businesses run by people of color not having access to the PPP loans. There's just been a lot of inequities shown throughout the pandemic. We also have a lot of organizations, whether it's companies, foundations, nonprofits, and even places of worship and schools, feeling pressure either from their constituencies or stakeholders or congregants to really focus on this work. And so we're at a very special time. And again, it's fantastic that all of you have decided to take on this journey. And lastly, it is just the right thing to do. Just a few ground rules for tonight. I ask that each of you listen actively, and hopefully you're already doing that by listening to some of the podcasts and the information that you already went through in preparation for this evening. Be open to new ideas. We, of course, want to show mutual respect, and we want to be very intentional. It's one thing to say that you want to do this work. It's one thing to actually do the readings, but then to really think about how you could be intentional and hopefully feel like you have a call to action at the end of this evening. I want to start off just by inviting everyone to put in the chat how you're feeling. Some of you may be feeling nervous. Some of you may be feeling anxious. Some of you may be feeling excited. So if you want to just share a little bit in the chat how are you feeling today, that would be great. What will we explore together? Of course, these are the readings that were included for this week: How Race is Constructed, White Supremacy, Understanding White Privilege, White Fragility, and the Jewish Community and Whiteness. I'm not going to have time to touch on each of these in deep detail during this part of the presentation, but I will touch on a few items, and then in our breakout groups, we'll be able to dig a little further into these different areas. Now, before we get started, I want to just sort of take the temperature of how, again, people are feeling. Thank you for those that are putting information in the chat: open-minded, anxious but hopeful, grateful for this opportunity, tired, we understand that, but determined, committed, and feel free to keep them going. Exhausted, ready to dig in. So I think that this is very normal to see this combination of, again, this is hard work and it can be very exhausting with everything happening in the news or just even the readings and the podcasts you were listening in. But it is important work. And I think that this evening and hopefully over the next couple of sessions, you'll find a way to sort of turn that exhaustion into a real call to action and do really important work. So I'm going to ask Jill now to, in just a few minutes, to open up the poll, but I really want you to think about where you as an individual are on your anti-racism continuum. So when you think of this continuum, you have one side that's exclusive, that you're actively excluding people of color, and then you have the fully inclusive of combating all forms of social oppression. I personally don't think that anyone's totally at the fully inclusive yet, because I think we always have work to do. I still have work to do. But Then in the middle, you often find people passive tolerant, but really not starting to do anything yet. You may start to see some symbolic change, carrying out some intentional inclusiveness efforts, identity change, increasing commitment. Maybe what you're doing tonight is starting to get into more of that identity change, that accountability. The structural change, ensuring full participation of people of color, and then again, fully inclusive. So we're going to open up this poll and just take a few minutes to think where you are. We'll just share in an aggregate way, so no one's going to know your answer. About 78% of the vote in, so we'll give it a few more minutes. Right, Jill, if you want to show the results of the poll. Okay, so most people feel like they're at the identity change, about 60%. So increasing commitment, as I mentioned, maybe the step that you've taken to do this 18-day challenge is your identity change. We do have some that feel like they're at passive, a few at symbolic, a few at structural, and looks like we don't have anyone who feel like they're fully inclusive at this point. So identity change at 60%, that's very common, where people are starting to do this work and looking at things that they can do as an individual, looking at things within maybe their workplace or their organizations, their places of worship, et cetera, but really recognizing that there are things that they still need to do and they're not quite at the point of being fully inclusive. And Jill, if you want to close the poll, did everyone see the results? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to touch on just a few of the items that you read, and then again, we'll have an opportunity to explore a little bit more in the breakout groups. So one of the first things that you all looked at was how race is constructed, that race is not biological. Race is a social construct. There's no common gene or cluster of genes common to all Blacks and to all whites. And what often we do is just make assumptions, right? What we feel these markers are. Maybe it's someone's skin color. I'll use myself as a personal example. I'm very, very fair skinned, but identify as a Black American. Hair. We may think, if my hair is, when it's down and it's curly, one may think that I'm one thing. When it's straight or up, one may think another. We make assumptions by name, eye shape, etc. And so we have to be very careful with these assumptions and sort of these micro aggressions, right? Applying specific characteristics to one particular group. You also looked at privilege. What is privilege? What is white privilege? An invisible package of unearned assets, which I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. Let's see if any of these sound familiar to you. I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against me or the appearance of my financial responsibility. I can be late to a meeting without having the lateness reflect on my race. And I can shop in a store without being followed. You also looked at white fragility. So looking at being very defensive, having your racial worldview being challenged, color blindness. I've been doing a lot of training around microaggressions, and in particular, the microinvalidation is important to think about here because people often say, I don't see color, I love everybody, I just want everyone to get along. Why do we have to do this kind of work? So really avoiding questioning any issues of racism because you're a very liberal person and you really feel like you don't see color. Unfortunately, when we do that, we really invalidate someone's lived experience. And really, it makes it very difficult for you not to see the privilege. Okay, so we will now move into the breakout groups where, again, you're going to look at some of the issues you discussed and read and listened to throughout this week. So whether it's how race is constructed, white supremacy, white privilege, Jewish and whiteness, you'll have an opportunity to really explore some of these concepts with the various facilitators we have tonight. And then the group will come back as a bigger group and we'll explore and hear some of the conversation that happened in your groups. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So Jill, if you want to move us into our breakout groups, that would be great.
People, okay, see. It said it was ending and they said leave. Welcome back. A few of the rooms are staying in their room, so that's why they're not back yet. So just bear with us. If you guys want to unmute and keep talking here in the main room, you can, Rachel.
Hold on, let me unmute them.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Beverly, I didn't mean to
Oh.
cut you off before while you were in the middle of sharing before we got.
Oh, sorry. I thought we had more time too, so I'm sorry for Jane who was in the middle of sharing. Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I think-
I thought we had 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I thought we had 5
My
minutes.
experience has been in breakout rooms that you don't need to hit the leave button. You just keep going. And then when
Right.
it's over, they
No,
dump
I
you
know,
but
out.
some of us, I didn't hit the leave
Wow, about
button.
it.
It
Just
still
keep
brought me
talking
back.
until they dump you.
No, they dumped me. I didn't hit the leave button. They brought me
Really?
back.
Because everyone else stayed in, so.
Yeah, sorry,
We
Jane.
hit,
There was a
we hit our
message
leave
saying
button
we
by
had till
accident.
8:10.
Well,
No,
keep talking. You guys have this time. You can keep talking. It's just your small group here. So.
Well,
We
got
left
a message
by
saying
accident.
till
No, we're all
8:10 and then
here.
it pulled us out at 8:05.
I think I lost my room. Can I
Oh,
get
okay.
back?
lost our room. This host has to put us back in the groups.
Oh well. We
Oh.
tried. Sorry
Can
about
someone
that.
try to put us back in breakout room number 4? Because we left by accident.
Yeah, I think everyone's
Rooms
coming
are
back
closed.
now.
Yeah, all the
I
rooms
think
are
I think
closed
came
now.
back. Sorry, we tried.
Apologies, everyone. We
Yeah.
were trying to extend the time to at least 8:10, but it looks like some
It
of
didn't.
the folks actually popped back in. So we'll have an opportunity to continue the conversation as a larger group.
And we're just going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. Thank you.
Right. I think we have everyone. Let's see. Just give it a few more minutes just to make sure everyone's back. Okay, thank you all. I'm so excited that everyone was having very passionate conversations. And I think certainly for our second and third sessions, we will give more time for the breakout groups because it's obvious people wanted to continue a little bit longer. So hopefully we can continue some of that conversation now. I mean, I'd love to start with the first group. Leslie, can you share a little bit about some of the conversation you were hearing around race?
Sure. So I think people were very struck by the first day's readings and wrapping our heads around the idea of race as a social construction. And I think we were just actually getting really into a really the whole question of if you are classified to some degree as white, as an Ashkenazi Jewish person, it's not about race, but it's about, there are some social constructs around that. What is it like every day to enter the world with markers of your Judaism versus what does it mean to wake up every morning as a Black person? And I had just referenced out actually Jonathan Capehart's article today, or op-ed in the Washington Post. So we were just really getting into a really, I think it was going to be a great discussion, but there will be several more times, I believe, in the course of the next 3 weeks where we can have that conversation or reach out to each other individually.
Thank you. And yes, we do want this not to be just this 18-day challenge, but look for opportunities to have those call to actions, to have an opportunity to continue the conversation. The Facebook group is also set up. So this is just a start to this discussion. Linda, would you share a little bit about what your group discussed around white supremacy?
Sure. So yes, the topic was white supremacy. The easier of the two questions that I had time to ask is, what do you think of, or who do you think of when you hear the term white supremacists? And of course, the list was included neo-Nazis, extremists, hate groups, KKK, the images that we saw on January 6th. And then the question, which is a really tough one, which is what does the country have to do to move forward to defeat white supremacy? One person said, and by the way, if anybody else has any from my group has anything they want to add, please do jump in. One person said that it's a pretty lofty goal. I mean, the idea of being able to eliminate or eradicate white supremacy is not going to happen in the short term. But I think some of the ideas were reaching out, engaging with our community, with our neighbors, with our family, with other groups, outside of the Jewish community to create relationships and better understanding of each other. One person said that she believes there'd have to be major reform to policing, that policing is definitely a problem, and it's not about defunding the police, it's about more, changing the criminal justice or reforming criminal justice system. And finally, we looked at what I believe she also said that it needs to come from the top down, that there should be a top-down approach. And someone else thought that actually the way to affect change and understanding is really for it to bubble up from the bottom up. And that is kind of how real and lasting change happens. So again, lots that we were, wrapping our heads around, and too short a conversation, but a really interesting one.
And I think one other point to that is sometimes our minds do go towards some of those groups that you listed, Linda, but also for us to think about some of the more unconscious bias or privileged ways that also enter that could be also white supremacy, but we don't think about it because we feel we're more liberal, or we're much more forward thinking when it comes to race and other people who don't look like us. So I think it's, yes, you can identify specific groups with white supremacy, but to think of it even more broader than that. But thank you. And we had two groups that actually looked at understanding white privilege. Who wants to go first?
Happy to go.
Okay, great.
So we spoke about white privilege, and the question that we talked about was what were some ways in which you have unearned advantage in your life? And some of the themes that came up were around safety and being able to go places without being viewed as suspect from other people or from police. Freedom from being facing violence from police or violence from others simply because of the color of your skin. Someone described it, which I thought was apt, as kind of getting the benefit of the doubt. And I thought it was really, I think a couple people mentioned hearing the phrase early on, several years ago, or hearing it in studies and not really thinking much about it, or thinking, well, that might be true, but what can I really do about it? And that when you really stop and think more about the benefits that are conferred on you because of the color of your skin, really what that means. And another theme that came up was children. So some of the people in the group talked about feeling that their children will also have this privilege, this unearned benefit just because of the color of their skin, and not having to fear for your children being a benefit. And then other people in the group who have children of color were talking about the reverse of that, and the fear that you have for your children who undergo harassment, who undergo that suspicion, or friends who face that simply because of the color of their skin. So I wish we had more time because we were getting into some really interesting discussions, but thank you to everyone for sharing.
And this definitely seems to be the theme this evening of wanting more time. And so we will certainly keep that in mind for the next session. And hopefully during the Q&A, even this evening, we'll have an opportunity to explore these a little bit more. Deborah, anything in your group that you want to add?
We also, went through the same question that Alana was talking about. We got to the second question in terms of taking responsibility for white privilege and what does it mean in your life, and talking about the responsibility to try to dismantle privilege, and starting personally and having it spread out to institutionally, but what an incredible challenge it is and how hard it is. And the other thing that came up, that someone brought up, was understanding the link between white supremacy and white privilege. And that while she had thought about white privilege in the past, like doing these readings really kind of brought the two ideas together, which, and it's an important point that, one kind of feeds the other, and it reinforces the systems that maintain white privilege and white supremacy in America. We were just getting to what's one privilege you do not want to give up, but unfortunately we ran out of time. But thank you to my group, because everybody was so thoughtful, and I really appreciated you all participating.
Actually, maybe one person would like to share, either from that group or another group. Anyone brave enough to share one privilege that would be really hard for you to give up? Go ahead, Andrea. Or Andrea. And you're still on mute.
Try again.
There we
Go
go.
ahead.
There
Okay,
you go.
sorry. It would be very difficult for me to give up my safety privilege. Always feeling safe places. That would be hard for me to give up.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
Yeah. This is Barry.
Go ahead, Barry.
I think it's very difficult to give up the attempt to give your children or your grandchildren every advantage that the system affords.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think throughout all these conversations, we definitely, think about our children and grandchildren, just family overall, and how all of this impact, and to not be able to know that they're safe and able to flourish. It's hard. So thank you for sharing that. Great. Let's move on to the white fragility group.
Okay, so that was my group. So the question was, how do you feel, if somebody calls you out for saying or doing something racist? And nobody really was able to say that they had been in a situation where they had been actually called out, but there was a feeling where there were two women who felt they called themselves out, feeling like maybe they shouldn't have said something, or they, tried to include somebody in a group because they were Black, or because, and then that person still went on to say that they didn't feel welcome. And so then how did that make herself feel? And so we talked about that fragility is really about ourselves, and that's our issue. It's hard to not worry about how it makes us feel, because really what we should be worrying about or helping to fix is, making the other person just feel welcome. And so that was the big part of the discussion. There was a question at the end, which I'm wondering if it will come up in our Q&A, about how do we address that? If you are then afraid, that you're pointing somebody out or you're doing something, and they're afraid to continue it for the sake of, feeling like making that person feel like it's a tokenism or something like that.
All really good points, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to explore more of those. If not today, definitely through the other sessions. Thank you. Really good discussion. And the last one, the Jewish community and whiteness.
Hi, we were talking about, the first question we were talking about is, do we agree that Caucasian Jews are functionally white in America? And every single person said 100% yes. That may have not what they had thought about perhaps in the past, but we had all agreed that physically we are all white passing and functionally white. The question that we really dug deep into, and was really wonderful to hear everyone's generous stories and experiences, is how can we be more inclusive of Jews of color? And I don't remember exactly who it was from our group, but the first person was, assume that someone is actually Jewish. When someone walks into the shul that is Black or Asian, it's not going over and saying, we're asking, we can all fill in the blanks with the questions there. And I really liked who had said that. The other thing is, someone had said, calling it out when people are talking, when there's undertones. I don't know if that's considered microaggressions, but we were talking about calling out those undertones to make sure that that's not acceptable in our community. Someone was saying at their shul, they don't have Jews of color, but they have started to bring in speakers and explore what beyond Ashkenazi Jews, what that looks like, and show their community what Jews do look like outside of Ashkenazi norms. And someone had said they were not worried because their children and grandchildren are so welcoming and loving, and in terms of where the intermarriage rates is going up, people in our group who were even, that was part of their story, their family's story, that they feel that there's more hope in that sense. And it's even participants who are more seasoned were saying that they felt that they have a lot of work to do. They have to unlearn in a lot of ways. So I thought it was really generous share from very different individuals in our group.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you for all those comments. We'll get into more in some of the later sessions about being that upstander and calling out when you see things that are wrong. And I do think we see some hope in with some of the new generation, and the fact that from a curriculum standpoint in schools and just the attention to this work, I hopefully, we'll see some really great things continue to happen. The comment with someone mentioned in your group about just sort of making the assumption, that's great, and not just sort of automatically thinking, oh, they must not be Jewish, but also looking at the flip side. As a director of the Jewish Women's Foundation, I'm not Jewish, but people often think I am because I'm the director of Jewish Women's Foundation. And I was very attracted to the work that they do to uplift women and girls, because it's been a part of a lot of my philanthropy work over the years. And so I think the point here is that we don't allow our biases and our microaggressions and just assumptions, but to really seek out real information, and but be respectful and not just go on beliefs or assumptions that we've had over the years and applying specific characteristics to people. Very, very good feedback and information that came out of the groups. And I really thank everyone for your candor and being open, because this work is important, and we can only make change if we're willing to have the tough discussions. So a big thank you to all the facilitators. And if anyone has a question, please start putting them in the chat. We want to be respectful of everyone's time tonight. And we're at 8:24, but we'll take a couple of questions, and then we will have a closing before we all leave for the evening. I can't help but to notice the ratio of women to men in this discussion. Why don't these conversations attract men? It's very interesting. I heard Barry mention in one of the groups that he also noticed that. So Barry, again, thank you for being here this evening. I mean, I do this work often, and I see a mix of people in these discussions from a gender standpoint, but it is interesting this evening. Linda or Leslie, I don't know if you want to add any thoughts around that, just based on other programs that you all do from a federation standpoint.
Well, I was definitely interested to see the split, but I wasn't surprised, more not from the federation point of view, but in other anti-racism groups that I have been in, skew very much towards women also. And so it's a no offense to the men who are with us, but sometimes it's women who need to lead the revolution, and maybe we're just out there ahead of things. I don't know. I think it's not necessarily true in other CRC, especially in other CRC based events, is we often get 50-50. But Linda, what's your take on it?
Sorry, I'm muting myself now. I think, I haven't looked at the number of men who registered for the 18-day challenge. There may be more who are reading the materials and just don't naturally gravitate to a dialogue session. I'm not making any generalizations here, but I certainly, with all the webinars that we had since last summer, I don't know if it was an equal number of men, but we certainly had a fair number of men take part as well. I do want to direct Cheryl. I don't know if you've seen all the questions, but there's a couple of interesting ones that have come in. So
yeah, I definitely thank you, Linda. One question about what kind of reaction when someone says that you're a racist, and I think someone actually shared a really good comment here. Non-fragile reaction is, thank you for sharing that with me. Can you tell me more about your comment so I can better understand it, or historically, or what that means to you? So get curious, not defensive. I could not have answered that better myself. That's exactly right. Again, you want to be open to conversations and sort of create a safe space and not get defensive. And sometimes we have to just sort of take a step back and reflect that even if your comment or something that made that person feel that you were racist was not intentional, you may just not be aware of your reaction to something. And that's where, again, these unconscious biases and microaggressions come in. So ask for that information, say, so I can better understand. So that was a great answer. And I love that other people are sharing ways. There's another one in here that I wanted to bring up. Oh, one of the videos featured a woman who sounded appalled at the question, what can we do? How can you not already know what to do in 2021? So this comes up a lot. I think the point here is that many people of color, again, feel like it's all on them to constantly explain, especially if they're in a workplace where they're the only person of color and they're the person that's constantly being asked, can you look at this and tell me what you think? Or I'm thinking about doing this, or, oh, such and such happened in the news. Can we talk about it? And it puts all of the weight on people of color. And so sometimes it can be very upsetting when you're the one that's always feeling like you're continuing to help move this work forward. So what I would try to do is, do what you're doing tonight, searching out more information, attending events like this, reading, listening to podcasts, and really trying to build that trust. And then once you build that trust, then yes, there you can certainly ask for questions or clarification or help, but just sort of saying, what can we do? Can be very draining. I like to compare it like when someone, if you lose, if there's a death in the family and people are always like, or if you get sick, what can I do? And instead of sort of arranging for food or help with the children, instead of putting it on that person to tell you, just really start to do the work yourself and figure out a way to help and make a difference. So I hope that helps. There are a lot of other great questions here, but we are at 8:30 and I want to make sure we have an opportunity to have our closing for this evening. What we'll do is do some follow-up either on the Facebook page or even emailing. Somehow we'll make sure that we get to these other questions. And then certainly during session 2 and session 3, as these questions are coming in, we'll make sure we, weave in some of that information with the second and third session as well. So again, I thank all of you for taking the time to be here tonight and taking the time to dedicate yourself to the readings and the podcasts this weekend. And now I'd like to turn it over to Deborah to close this out. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you for guiding us through tonight's conversation. I'm Deborah Nevis, a member of the Jewish Federation's Anti-Racism Task Force. Tonight's program is part of the 18-Day Challenge brought to you by the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. We hope you've managed to carve out time each day to read, listen, and watch the assignments we've sent you. The issues we explored tonight are challenging and, for some of us, uncomfortable, but they are also serious and important and need to be addressed as we work together to combat racial injustice. For those who haven't already joined our private Facebook group, you can find the link on the weekly emails. We encourage you to join our community conversation and continue the discussions we had tonight online there. Week 2 starts tomorrow. The materials for it were included in the email you received today. They focus on intersectionality and Jews of color, as well as the history of Black-Jewish relations, including our local experience in Greater Metro West. It will be another interesting week. We look forward to seeing you again next Sunday to unpack all the issues raised this coming week. Thank you again for joining us, and good night.